in my project on employing a CNN as a physician's aid for multi-class classification of Alzheimer's disease through MRI scans. So I think the first question to start off with here is, what is Alzheimer's disease? Right, and so Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that usually affects people over the age of 65. And so mechanically what this disease is that two proteins already present in the brain, tau and beta amyloid, start to accumulate, and the tau protein starts to create tangles inside of the neurons, and the beta amyloid protein starts to create plaques around the ends of the neurons, and both of these accumulations make it so that the neurons first have a harder time communicating with each other, and a lot of the times the electrical signals cannot be sent between them. And then later on they die. And this is what causes kind of the cognitive dysfunction, the memory loss, the motor disabilities, etc. And so what are the impacts of Alzheimer's disease? Right, so there are many very large impacts. First is societally. So for the patients themselves, it's number one, taking away kind of their part of themselves. So they're at an older age, they've accumulated all these memories, and a lot of times memories are what make a person. And so stripping away these memories slowly is very painful for the person themselves, as well as their family members around them. And this also makes it so their independence is kind of taken away from them. And so a lot of the times what happens is that families either have to leave their jobs and become caregivers, or have to hire full-time caregivers. And this is not only very emotionally damaging, but it also is very financially kind of deficitating. And next is kind of the health impact, right? So as of now, there are over 55 million cases estimated worldwide, and that's just as of 2023. And this disease is one of those is very impactful. It keeps doubling every 5 years beyond the age of 65, and it'll only keep on growing. And so one would think, because this disease is so widespread, that the ways of kind of diagnosing and classifying Alzheimer's would be very set in stone and would be very accurate at this point. But that is actually incorrect. The current solutions for not just diagnosing, but more importantly classifying the different progressions of Alzheimer's are missing the marks. So number one, the main way of classification as of now is manual analysis done by doctors. And through this, doctors usually give their patients cognitive tests, such as MMSEs, FAQs, 88s, and so forth. And these tests can take anywhere from 10 minutes to hours. And what happens is, after a patient takes these tests, the doctors then manually analyze the results and kind of figure out where they lie. After that, there's of course cerebral fluid scans, MRIs that the doctors have to manually analyze. And this process is not only extremely time-consuming and complex, but the main issue is that it delays crucial treatment. Alzheimer's disease is one of those diseases that have to be caught early in order to kind of maintain the patient's state in the best way possible. And another big issue is like the variability in diagnosis accuracy. A lot of the times, the more experienced the physician and the more cases they've seen, the more accurate they are. And so that kind of moves on to my next point. As of now, there's a 14 to 30% diagnosis rate. Now I know that's actually a very large kind of scale, but depending on, usually more experienced physicians have like a 14% misdiagnosis rate, and the more like kind of newer physicians have a misdiagnosis rate of around 30%. And this is millions of lives that a lot of times, because of this takes, already Alzheimer's takes several months to classify, and misdiagnosis really just prolong the process, and they compound. A lot of times this leads to inaccurate healthcare plans and also overloaded healthcare systems. Alzheimer's disease is so widespread that a lot of the times hospitals and physicians are overloaded with the amount of cases that are coming in and are not able to keep up not only on the time frame, but just the amount of patients. And so my proposed solution is a physician's aid, a convolutional neural network model proposed to assist doctors in classifying the progressions of Alzheimer's disease based on MRI scan analysis. So some of the strengths of this model would be, number one, when first making the model, these are some of my targets, were number one, a high accuracy. We were planning to reach an accuracy for around 95% across all the different stages, which are mild cognitive impairment, mild impairment, moderate Alzheimer's, and then no Alzheimer's. And so these were kind of the different stages we were targeting. Next is rapid processing. We would like to, when we were aiming for this model, we would like for it to become an instantaneous classification. Of course, this is used as a doctor's aid, so its opinion alone will not kind of definitively classify a patient, but it can significantly reduce the time from months to weeks. Next is the fact that it is non-intrusive, and by this I mean patient privacy. Surrounding healthcare, there are a lot of issues especially with HIPAA, about kind of where all of the information and patient data is going. And so for this, because my model only analyzes MRI scans, there's very little patient data which attached to MRI scans, such as like age, name, and demographic, and a lot of the times this can be completely wiped. So kind of starting with my model, first thing is kind of model selection. So like I said before, I'm using a convolutional neural network, and this was kind of chosen for its ability to automatically extract kind of relevant features from medical images. It's very good for image processing, which is the exact task my model aims to go in. And it's also, at this moment, there's a lot of research being done in CNNs. They're very popular, so there's a lot of like data sets and bases to go off of when kind of progressing my model. Next, I use an Inception v3 framework, and this is used as a base model due to its effectiveness, again, in image classification, and it's already weighted base weights. So one big thing about Inception v3 is that it kind of uses ResNet and ImageNet already weighted bases to kind of help in later training the model. So I'm not actually starting from point 0, I have kind of a base to work off of. And next, like I said before, is ResNet. ResNet is trained off of ImageNet, and so this already has kind of a lot of good image base weights, and it helps improving accuracy and performance. It's also very good for deep learning because of the different dense nodes and different dense layers. So next, after kind of selecting my model, was like the training process. And so first was the data set. So I actually got a very small data set of only 6,000 pre-labeled MRI images. These are posted by Kaiser Permanente Reputable Doctor, and this was actually taken after all of these were classified after the patients were deceased, which made it so that the classification of Alzheimer's was actually definitive. There was no misclassification, right? Next was the pre-processing. So the images that I got were actually already pre-processed, but I had to further pre-process them to kind of fit my model. And with this, I had to resize, normalize, augment, convert the grayscale to RGB to kind of get more differentiation in the different MRI scans, etc. Next was the transfer learning. So like I said before, I used Inception v3 with pre-trained weights from ImageNet. And next was the custom layer. So with the custom layer, I used dense layers with ReLU activation or rectified linear unit activation, and dropout layers, batch normalization, layers for stable training. And so ReLU was really good because it kind of makes it so that the outputs are not like linearized. And so every output, for each output, if the model predicts it correctly, then it just completely outputs that exact model. But then if it is incorrect, it gives it 0. So there's a better differentiation for the model itself, and it learns a lot faster. And last was the hyperparameter tuning. So once all of my different layers are kind of built and the model is built, there are small hyperparameters such as learning rate, dropout rate, number of nodes in the dense layers, and different and so on and so forth. And these are very individualized for every model. So these are something that I had to genuinely very much like tweak. I had to run through my epochs over and over again and kind of hit kind of a sweet spot where my model worked in best conditions. So next were kind of my regularization and evaluative protocol. So for regularization, the first thing I used was early stopping. And so this halted training if validation loss did not improve over several epochs. And so what an epoch is when the model runs through the training data a full time. And so in all, my final model had around 150 epochs, and training the model itself took around 3 hours. And so the problem was that this takes up a lot of energy from the computer. And so what early stopping did was that if the loss was not improving over several epochs, then it just completely stopped training. And this made it a lot more efficient to train the model, as well as kind of gave me a baseline to go off of when I was kind of tuning my hyperparameters. And validation loss is basically how much of the model was incorrect, like how many of the outputs were incorrect. And so ideally, we would like the validation loss to be as close to 0 as possible. And so usually if it kind of halted at, like, for example, 0.7, then the early stopping kicked in and just stopped the model training. Next was learning rate. So the learning rate is kind of similar in validation loss. Whenever validation loss plateaued, the learning rate kind of adjusted dynamically, making it so that the validation loss was always continuously changing and not just halted. Because a lot of the times a very big issue is that once the learning rate or the validation loss plateaus, it's kind of hard to make changes from there on. And then next was the data splitting. So my 6,000 plus MRI images were split into a 70-20-10 split. So 70% of the data was used for training, 20% was used for validation, and 10% was used as like a test set to test kind of the model. And last were the performance metrics. So these were the metrics that I used to evaluate my model's performance. First was accuracy, and what this is basically the number of how many my model got correct over how many altogether. So just in general, how my model was doing. Next was precision, which is the predicted correct over the total correct, which is just kind of like one different metric. Next was the recall, which is the predicted total correct over each class, the total in each class. So this gave me kind of like a more detailed kind of result from each like separate class. For example, like the moderate Alzheimer's versus the mild Alzheimer's. Next is the F1 score, which is a average of the precision and recall. And then we had the ROC AUC and the one versus all. So one versus all AUC is kind of a binary evaluation metric, which because I have 4 classes, AUC is generally used for binary classification, but because I had 4, it kind of compared one class against the rest of them and made it kind of trick the model into like a binary classification. So then these are the results that my model got. As you can see, all of the results are around 92 to 97%. Now, one problem I will tell is although the model does seem to have very good results, it is very rare for it to be 100%. And so as you can see in the moderate section, it does say 100%. And that is actually, that's very variable because when I came to my data set, this is kind of the issue with the smaller data set as well, I didn't have enough images for the moderate scale, right? So this meant that kind of my model kind of overfitted in a way to that. And so I think that is one issue that can only really be kind of fought with a larger data set. But in other ways, I also had a lot of different ways of kind of combating overfitting, such as like dense layers, dropout, etc. But there is always a little bit of like a problem with such a small data set. And next you can see kind of my OVA AUC, which just kind of shows how much of my model kind of predicts correctly. And as you can see, there is quite high. And this is like not as much in accuracy, is kind of what I looked at more. So the accuracy average is around 95%. But I will say that AUC is kind of under a curve, so how much of my model kind of predicts in the wanted curve, and it is around 99%. So next are the charts. So these charts were actually were produced by my model itself. And we're going to start with the validation loss by epochs. So kind of the x-axis is the number of epochs. As you can see, it goes up to 150. And the y-axis is kind of like the validation loss. So like I said before, we would like for validation loss to be as close to 0 as possible. And in this, we got to around 0.1, which is very good. And it basically shows how my model progresses with each epoch and if it's actually learning from itself. And as you can see, because it is a constant slope down, it is learning from itself quite well. Next is the validation AUC by epochs. So again, the epochs is the x-axis, validation AUC is the y. And this is kind of the opposite. For AUC, we want it to be as close to 100 or 1 as possible. And that kind of shows how my model is learning as well. And last is my confusion matrix. So a confusion matrix is actually a very good way of kind of understanding where your results fall. And because this kind of shows exactly how the model predicted each and every MRI and kind of where it falls. But like I said before, as you can see in the moderate level, there are only close to like 140 images comparatively to the rest, where there's like thousands. So that's kind of why there's a little bit of overfitting happening in that area. So what are the benefits of my solution? Right, so when it comes to numbers, I did hit my target accuracy of around 95% across all the stages of Alzheimer's disease. Next is the speed. So my model itself, with the graphical user interface or the GUI that I create on the side to kind of implement my model, it does have a diagnosis time of around 2.8 seconds. And that kind of course, varies between computers and RAMs, but that's kind of my baseline. Next is reliability. Because it is an AI model, you can feed it as much data as you want, as much data set as you want, and it'll keep learning. Actually, the more data, the better. Next is like the timeline. So this does address the pressing need for timely and precise classification, which is crucial for early classification of Alzheimer's. Like I said before, it is crucial for Alzheimer's patients to be diagnosed early, because a lot of times when the neurons die off, it's very hard for them to regenerate. And this is where a lot of people lose memories and cognitive function. Next is non-intrusive. This does utilize only MRI scans, and it's a very non-invasive modality, has very little patient data attached. And a lot of the times, there are systems in place that can completely wipe the MRIs of their patient data, and it is not necessary for a good and accurate classification. In fact, the data set that I did I trained my model on had no patient data attached. And of course, overall, when all of these kind of different factors are combined, it is enhanced patient care. It improved diagnostic accuracy and speed, leading to better treatment plans and outcomes. So some of my future work, right? So although I talk about how MRIs are amazing and how the fact that I only use MRIs to train my model is very good for patient data, it is a fact that you cannot only diagnose Alzheimer's based off of MRIs. There are a lot of different factors that come into play where it's like cerebral fluid analysis. There's also like doctor input, and the thing is, because Alzheimer's is such a varying disease, a lot of the times there is doctor input necessary. And this is by no means a replacement for doctors, simply an aid to kind of help doctors target where they have to look rather than have to go through a whole broad scope of activities. And so to kind of combat this, I would like to integrate additional diagnostic modalities such as PET scans, diffusional MRIs, and fluid analysis. And I think these different aspects will just make the model a more well-rounded tool, a diagnostic tool. Next is to enhance model generalization. So as of now, there are actually a lot of different people doing similar things to me. But the main issue is that their accuracy is hitting around the 60%, which is, I guess, not as much of a jump from the current analysis. And so I think the biggest problem with that is they're trying to use all these modalities together, which is often very difficult for the model. They're trying to combine the PET scans, MRI scans, all of this into like one data set analysis, and that's very difficult. So what I would like to do is when I am expanding to multimodal analysis, I would like it to be, I would like to train my model in the same way that I train the MRI scans. And last is kind of advanced real-world application. I would like to focus on the integration of AI tools into the diagnostics process. There are already many advancements happening in this area. For example, there are already dentist tools that are kind of doing basically exactly what this is doing, but for dentists. And so there's a very promising chance that this will very much help speed up diagnosis, as well as just make it a lot more accurate, and will also take off a lot of pressure from doctors. And so there's a lot of personalization that can be done to Alzheimer's diagnosis and treatment, and there's a lot of area for improvement as well. So I would really like to thank my mentors, Dr. Virginia Fernandez and Dr. Amparo Gomez, for all their help, and I would like to, of course, thank CCIR for this opportunity. Thank you.